I want you to sign these papers.
Huh?
You will get $6 million. You won't have to worry about your future. Everything has already been arranged, and the Aspen house will be yours. All I need from you is your signature.
Why are you paying me to leave you?
Because I want this marriage to end quietly.
No. Is there another woman?
No.
Then look me in the eyes and tell me you don't love me anymore.
I don't love you anymore.
My husband paid me $6 million to sign our divorce papers and disappear from his life. I thought he was paying me to leave quietly. I didn't know he was racing against a secret that could change everything. 3 weeks after I signed those papers, I discovered the truth. I was carrying his child. My name is Camille Harper, and for almost 9 years I believed I knew the man I had married. His name was Grant Calloway, a powerful Chicago real estate developer whose name appeared on luxury buildings, charity boards, and business magazines. From the outside, our marriage looked perfect. But behind the walls of our lakefront home, something had changed. Grant came home later. His phone was suddenly always in his hand. Conversations that once lasted for hours became painfully short. And whenever I asked what was wrong, he gave me the same answer: nothing. I believed him, until the night he placed a folder on our dining table and offered me $6 million to walk away from our marriage. Before we continue, tell us the city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel and knowing where you're joining us from. And if you love emotional stories filled with love, betrayal, secrets, unexpected twists, and unforgettable endings, subscribe to the channel because you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's continue. I remember the room more clearly than I remember his words. It was almost 9 at night, and the rain had been tapping against the tall windows for hours. Dinner sat untouched between us. Grant looked unusually calm, which frightened me more than anger would have. He wore the navy suit he usually reserved for important meetings, but there was something different about his face. His eyes avoided mine. His hands were folded tightly in front of him. Then he pushed the folder toward me. Inside were divorce documents, financial agreements, property transfers, and one number that seemed almost impossible to comprehend: $6 million. I stared at the figure for several seconds before looking back at him. "What is this?" I asked. Grant didn't answer immediately. Instead, he told me that he wanted a clean separation. No courtroom, no public argument, no accusations, no questions. In exchange, he would transfer $6 million into an account in my name, give me the house in Aspen, and make sure I never had to worry about money again. There was only one condition: I had to sign. The strange thing about grief is that sometimes it begins before you know what you've lost. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the folder across the room. I simply sat there, staring at the man who had once promised me that we would grow old together. Grant and I had met when I was 29 and he was 33. At the time, he wasn't wealthy. He was ambitious, impatient, and constantly working. I had been the person who believed in him before anyone knew his name. I helped him prepare his first investor presentation. I stayed awake with him when his first development deal nearly collapsed. I celebrated when his company finally secured its first major project. When the money came, I never questioned whether it belonged to both of us. We were married. We were building a life together. So when he asked me to walk away for $6 million, the money didn't feel like generosity. It felt like a price someone had placed on my years of loyalty. I asked Grant one question: "Is there someone else?" He looked at me for perhaps 2 seconds before answering. No. That single word would haunt me later. Because Grant didn't hesitate. He didn't look surprised. He didn't become defensive. He simply lied. I didn't know that yet. I only knew that something inside me had gone strangely quiet. I asked whether he still loved me. This time he looked away. That was the answer. 2 days later, I met with an attorney. 3 days after that, I signed the papers. I told myself I was choosing dignity. I told myself that if a man no longer wanted me, I would never beg him to stay. And when the $6 million arrived, I transferred most of it into accounts I wouldn't touch. I packed my clothes, my books, my mother's old photographs, and the small collection of things that still felt like mine. Then I left the house without turning around. My last morning as Mrs. Grant Calloway was strangely ordinary. The sun came through the bedroom curtains. The coffee machine made the same soft sound it had made every morning for years. Grant was downstairs when I walked out with my suitcase. He didn't come upstairs to help me. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't say that he was sorry. He simply stood near the front door and watched me leave. For one brief moment, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Then I remembered the divorce papers. I remembered the $6 million. I remembered the coldness in his voice. I got into my car and drove away. I rented a quiet house outside Evanston, far enough from Chicago to avoid familiar faces, but close enough that I could still visit my sister, Olivia. I didn't know what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I only knew what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to chase Grant Calloway. 3 weeks later, Olivia called me. Her voice sounded different. She asked if I was sitting down. I laughed because I thought she was exaggerating. Then she told me she had seen a photograph online. Grant was standing outside a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago. Beside him was a woman I had never seen before. She wore an elegant ivory dress and a diamond necklace. But that wasn't what made my stomach turn. It was the ring on her finger. A wedding ring. Olivia sent me the photograph. I stared at it for nearly a minute. Then I zoomed in. The ring was unmistakable. Grant had married her. 3 weeks after I signed our divorce papers, he had married another woman. Her name was Vanessa Reed. She was 34, a corporate attorney, and according to the article, she and Grant had been quietly dating for over a year. Over a year. That meant that while I was helping Grant build a life, he had already been building another one. I didn't confront him immediately. I wish I could say that I was strong enough to walk away without looking back, but I wasn't. I drove past our old house one evening. I parked across the street and watched the lights through the windows. For 9 years, those windows had been mine too. I had chosen the curtains. I had planted the garden. I had stood in that kitchen on Christmas mornings, and now Vanessa was living there. At one point, the front door opened. Grant stepped outside. Vanessa followed him. He kissed her forehead before they disappeared inside. I sat in my car and cried until my chest hurt. But something else happened that night. I stopped asking why he didn't love me anymore. I started asking a different question. How long had he been planning this? Because the divorce wasn't sudden, the $6 million wasn't an impulsive gesture, and Vanessa hadn't appeared after our marriage ended. She had already been there. A week later, my attorney called me. He had discovered something unusual in the financial documents Grant had provided during the divorce. Several assets had been moved into trusts months before I signed anything. At first, it looked like routine financial restructuring. Then my attorney noticed that one of the trusts was connected to a property company that had recently purchased a townhouse in downtown Chicago. The company was controlled by a holding group associated with Vanessa's family. That was when the story became more complicated. Grant hadn't simply wanted a divorce. He had been rearranging his financial life before I knew the marriage was ending. He had created distance between us legally before creating distance between us emotionally. The $6 million suddenly looked different. It wasn't just a settlement. It looked like a carefully calculated exit fee. He wanted me gone quickly, quietly, and permanently. Then I received a message from someone I didn't know. It arrived at 2:17 in the morning. The woman introduced herself as Rachel Monroe. She had worked as Grant's executive assistant for 6 years. She said she was leaving his company and wanted to tell me something she believed I deserved to know. She wrote that Grant and Vanessa had been involved long before my divorce. She said there had been hotel meetings, private dinners, business trips, and conversations about the future. But the final message contained something that made my hands shake. Rachel said, "There is one thing he was afraid you would discover before you signed." I called her immediately. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. The following morning, she finally returned my call. Her voice was low and nervous. She told me that Grant had been desperate to make sure I signed the divorce papers before a particular date. I asked why. Rachel paused. Then she said, "Because he knew something about you that you didn't know yet." I didn't understand what she meant. Rachel told me that several months earlier, Grant had discovered that I might be entitled to a larger portion of the company if certain marital assets were considered jointly held. But that wasn't the real reason he was rushing. There was another matter. During one of his conversations with his private attorney, Grant had apparently asked about what would happen if I became pregnant before the divorce was finalized. Rachel said she overheard enough to understand that Grant was worried about the possibility. I laughed when she told me. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded impossible. Grant and I hadn't talked about children in months. We had tried before. There had been disappointments. Eventually, we stopped discussing it. I had assumed that chapter of our lives was over, but Rachel told me something else. Grant had specifically asked his attorney whether a pregnancy could affect the divorce agreement. That question stayed in my mind long after our conversation ended. 2 days later, I woke up feeling sick. At first, I blamed stress. Then I remembered something I hadn't considered. My period was late. Not a few days late, more than 2 weeks. I drove to a pharmacy, bought a pregnancy test, and returned home without telling Olivia. I sat on the bathroom floor and waited. When the second line appeared, I thought I was imagining it. I took another test, then another. All 3 were positive. I called my doctor and scheduled an appointment. The blood test confirmed it. I was pregnant. 6 weeks. The room seemed to tilt around me. I put one hand over my stomach even though there was nothing to feel yet. Then I began to cry. Not because I was unhappy. I had dreamed about becoming a mother for years. I cried because the man who had paid me $6 million to disappear had unknowingly left his own child behind. For several hours I considered calling Grant. Then I remembered the woman in the photograph. Vanessa, his new wife, the house that used to be mine, the lies, the financial arrangements, the secret relationship. I decided that I would not call him immediately. I needed to understand my legal position first. My attorney confirmed that the pregnancy could significantly affect matters depending on the terms of the divorce and the laws governing our situation. But there was something more important. Grant had signed the settlement believing there were no children involved. Now there was a child, his child. I could have fought him publicly. I could have exposed Vanessa. I could have gone to the newspapers and told them everything. Instead, I chose something quieter. I would let Grant believe his plan had worked. I would disappear. But I would disappear on my own terms. I named the baby before I knew the baby's gender. I chose the name Avery. It was a name Grant and I had once discussed years earlier. I kept the pregnancy private. Olivia became the only person who knew besides my doctor and attorney. As my stomach grew, so did my anger. But something unexpected happened too. The child inside me changed the way I looked at my past. I stopped thinking about what Grant had taken from me and started thinking about what life was giving me. I began rebuilding myself. I opened a small design studio using part of the money from the settlement. I hired 2 young women who had recently graduated from college. I started creating spaces for people who wanted beautiful homes without the coldness that often came with luxury. Slowly, my life became mine again. I wasn't Grant Calloway's abandoned wife anymore. I was Camille Harper, a woman building something he could never take from her. 7 months after I left Grant, Vanessa contacted me. I almost didn't answer. She said she wanted to meet. I agreed because I wanted to understand why. We met at a quiet cafe in Evanston. Vanessa arrived alone. She looked nothing like the woman from the photographs. She looked exhausted. Her first words were unexpected. "He lied to me too." I said nothing. Vanessa told me Grant had promised her that our marriage had been emotionally over long before she came into his life. He told her I knew about their relationship. He told her the divorce was mutual. He had told her that the $6 million was simply a generous gesture to a woman who wanted to move on. Vanessa had believed him. Then she discovered the same financial documents I had found. She learned that Grant had hidden assets from both of us. She also discovered that he had been using her family's connections to expand his business. Suddenly, Vanessa wasn't the enemy anymore. She was another person who had believed the wrong man. Vanessa gave me a folder. Inside were copies of emails, financial records, photographs, hotel reservations, and conversations between Grant and his attorneys. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply said, "You deserve to know what happened." The documents revealed that Grant had been planning our divorce for nearly a year. He had already chosen Vanessa. He had already planned their wedding. He had already decided which properties would remain under his control. But there was one detail he had never planned for: my pregnancy. And there was another detail neither of us had expected. One of the emails contained a message from Grant to his attorney, written just days before I signed the divorce agreement. He wrote that once the papers were finalized, Camille will have no reason to come back. Reading that sentence hurt more than the betrayal itself, not because I wanted to go back, but because he had reduced 9 years of marriage to a problem he believed money could solve. Then Vanessa told me something I didn't know. Grant had recently discovered that I was pregnant. I froze. I hadn't told him. Vanessa said he had received information through someone connected to my medical office. I immediately contacted my attorney. That was when we discovered that Grant had begun making inquiries about my pregnancy weeks earlier. He knew. He had known before I realized it myself. And suddenly, the $6 million made sense in a way that frightened me. Grant hadn't paid me to leave because he wanted freedom. He had paid me to leave before I discovered I was carrying his child. He believed that if the divorce was finalized quickly enough, he could control the situation afterward. He had underestimated me. More importantly, he had underestimated the one thing money could never purchase: my willingness to protect my child. I agreed to meet Grant one final time. We met in the conference room of his attorney's office. He walked in wearing the same calm expression I had seen on the night he gave me the divorce papers. But this time, I wasn't the woman sitting across from him with unanswered questions. I placed the medical report on the table. Grant stared at it. His face changed immediately. For the first time in months, I saw fear. He asked how long I had known. I told him it didn't matter. He asked why I hadn't told him. I reminded him that he had paid $6 million to remove me from his life. Then I asked him one question. "Did you know I was pregnant when you made me sign?" He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. Finally, he admitted that he had suspected it. He said he wasn't certain. He claimed he thought I would tell him if it were true. I looked at him and realized that even then, he was still trying to make the truth sound like an accident. Grant expected me to demand more money. Instead, I told him I didn't want another dollar from him. He looked genuinely confused. I told him that the $6 million was already enough. I had built a new life with it. I had built a business. I had built security for my child. What I wanted now was accountability. My attorney had already prepared the documents. The evidence Vanessa gave me had exposed financial arrangements that could create serious legal consequences for Grant. He could fight, he could deny, he could hire expensive lawyers, but he could not erase emails, bank records, or the people who had witnessed what he had done. Grant asked whether I intended to destroy him. I told him no. "You did that yourself," I said. "I'm only refusing to protect you from the consequences." For the first time since our marriage ended, I walked away from Grant without wondering whether he would follow me. 3 months later, my daughter was born. I named her Avery Harper. She arrived just before sunrise, on a cold morning when the city was still quiet. When I held her for the first time, I understood something I had been too heartbroken to understand before. Grant hadn't taken my future from me. He had accidentally pushed me toward it. I had spent months mourning the woman I thought I was supposed to remain. But motherhood gave me a new identity. I didn't need Grant to apologize. I didn't need him to regret losing me. I didn't need Vanessa to disappear. I didn't need the world to decide that I had been the better woman. I simply needed to raise my daughter in a life built on honesty. Grant eventually received visitation rights, but our relationship became strictly about Avery. Nothing more. The romance was over. The marriage was over. And strangely, I finally felt free. But the story didn't end there. A year after Avery was born, Grant's company collapsed. The financial records Vanessa had given me led investigators to transactions that had been hidden from investors. Several properties were frozen. His reputation disappeared almost overnight. The same newspapers that had once celebrated Grant Calloway began reporting on his legal troubles. Vanessa left him. She eventually moved to California and started a new career. As for me, my design studio grew. I opened a second office and began funding scholarships for young women interested in architecture and design. People sometimes asked whether I regretted signing the divorce papers. I always gave them the same answer: no, because signing those papers ended one life. It gave me the courage to build another. The $6 million changed my circumstances, but it wasn't the money that saved me. It was the moment I finally understood that losing someone who doesn't value you is not the same thing as losing yourself. Years later, Avery asked me why her father and I didn't live together. I didn't tell her every detail. She was too young. I simply told her that sometimes two people can love a dream and still discover that they are not meant to live inside the same life. Then I told her something my mother once told me. Never measure your worth by the person who decided to leave. Avery looked at me and asked if I was sad when she was born. I smiled and told her I was terrified, heartbroken, and hopeful all at the same time. Because sometimes life closes a door so loudly that you think everything is over. You don't realize until later that another door has been opening quietly behind you. Grant gave me $6 million to sign away our marriage. He thought he was buying his freedom. He didn't realize he was giving me the resources to build a life he could never control, and the child he never expected became the greatest blessing of my life. If this story touched your heart, take a moment and tell me in the comments, would you have walked away with the $6 million, or would you have fought for the truth? I'd truly love to hear what you would have done. And if you believe some endings are actually new beginnings, subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. There are more emotional stories of love, betrayal, family secrets, and unexpected twists waiting for you. Thank you for watching until the very end. Until our next story, remember this: sometimes what feels like the end of your life is simply the beginning of the life you were meant to live.